This episode is in partnership with Authority Magazine. Authority Magazine, a Medium publication, is devoted to sharing in-depth and interesting interviews featuring people who are authorities in business, pop culture, wellness, social impact, and tech. You could easily say Nan Devitt Tremblay is a TV star and a fashion icon, even though she rarely appeared on camera or on the runways of Paris.
But what she did do was pioneer a form of television that took us behind the scenes, and it has been reproduced and copied ever since.
Nan was the Paris reporter for the now legendary Fashion TV, which came out of Toronto in the 1980s. Nancy Devitt Tremblay, welcome to Believe in People. I just want to start off first by saying we're talking about FTV, Fashion TV, which was a pretty popular television show in the 80s. And it involved, all the news about fashion going on in the world, fashion, everything else. You were the Paris person. So in my view, you were at the pinnacle of it all. You were the one that was going to, the fashion runways and everything in Paris. Isn't that sort of an exclusive, perhaps exclusionary sort of atmosphere? How does a young person get into that, get behind those curtains?
Being very naive.
You or me.
In the 90s. It was in the 90s too, but I started in 86. Yeah, it was very exclusive. Those spaces were very much closed to people who weren't insiders. And it really was with a lot of naivete that, fashion television was starting in Toronto, and it had a whole gonzo feel, a DIY feel. And I bought into that and just said, well, we want to get, at first we thought we'd ask the houses to give us free videos, and that would be cheap TV, right? And of course the French houses were like, what are you even talking about? Most of them a lot of them didn't even video their shows, and some did. And then it was like, we're not giving it to you. Anyway, so we said, well, we better hire a crew and we better start filming. And I lucked out and found myself with this cameraman named John Cressy, who is a very suave guy from Montreal, a cinematographer. And he'd been in Paris for a long time. And he just went sailing into these spaces without asking any questions and just headed backstage when there weren't cameras there. And he just acted like we were allowed to be there. And so people just said, oh, okay, they're here, they're filming. And because we were so much on the ground, getting into those places that were very much closed, they just got used to us being around. So they gave us a lot of access for a long time. Yeah, it was crazy.
Wow. And Anne, okay, so take us back a little. You started as a journalist, and then how in the world did it then kind of morph into this experience? You're trailblazing, really.
Oh, well, yeah, but the whole city TV is trailblazing, that's for sure. Well, I was at CBC, and can I say I worked with Kevin years and years, a million trillion years ago, and I was doing writing the news, but then I started to do feature reporting, and I was doing reporting about arts and culture and the new music scene, and at the CBC, and wanted to move to Paris. For the romantic vision of moving to Paris and trying to be, like more like Callahan or Ernest Hemingway. And so we moved. And as I was moving, fashion television was getting off the ground, and they said, oh, you want to do some stories for us, or you want to get some free videos for us. And how life is really funny sometimes. It's so serendipitous. I fell into this. I'm so not a fashion person, and my background wasn't anything to do with fashion. And I never cracked open a magazine practically the whole time I was reporting on fashion. It sounds just so rude, but that was why I think fashion television worked. We all kind of, in the people who are part of it, we realized that it was a type of documentary thing that we were doing. We didn't care about the hemlines or the colors, or
Man, you're Anne Hathaway in Devil Wears Prada.
Oh, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. Yeah. But anyway, it was funny.
You made a lot of, fashion models were fashion models, and they're big in magazines. male and female, obviously, and the designers were sort of renowned for their names, Yves Saint Laurent and people like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, through your sort of fly on the wall experiences where you're having, and we're going to talk about your film in a minute, where you're having Linda Evangelista made up in front of you, things that no one, I mean, I would say that's very cutting edge. You made those people into celebrities, did you not?
No, they were making themselves into celebrities, but the fact that there was a TV show and then some more that followed definitely helped in terms of their recognizability, because magazines, it's still to this day, they rarely put the name of a model. I always find it's incredible. But in those days, no way. People didn't know models' names. And it, it helped. And, there'd be Tyra Banks would be there with her mother and she'd be gabbing too, and people would be talking about what they were feeling and if they were nervous or if they, were observed, sometimes they said nasty things about each other, whatever, or funny things and or what they were wearing or what they liked. And also we gave them a chance to be PR people for the designers. And the designers, I can remember the looks in the eyes of the designers when they would realize how amazing this young woman with no PR training, these models, these beautiful 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, wearing their clothes and speaking so eloquently. And so it became this kind of, the television exposure was a bit of an engine, but that was all happening. And those women didn't need us. They were going to be supers.
I'm really interested in knowing more about your film, and Kevin's going to pronounce it for me. But take us through, can you share one story that you found really interesting? Something that sort of stands out for you?
Oh my gosh. There are quite a few. And I'm just trying to think of what's appropriate, what I should say quickly. We've just got a half an hour here. Well, I just posted, and my Instagram is very much a practice and research tool, and I connect with people and expand what I know and so on. But anyway, I just posted John Galliano the day he ate my microphone, and that was interesting.
Okay, elaborate on that one.
Well, he was probably very nervy and excited, and he had just presented his first collection for Givenchy, and that was a moment where all the French old guard were there in the seats. And when I look back at the old video, their faces, they were not giving him an inch. Hubert de Givenchy had been retired at 78, but had been kind of pushed out of his own house. And there was this upstart guy that everybody thought was a little wild, given the keys to the castle.
And he was wild.
And he was wild. And everybody's in the audience just like, and at the end, I interviewed him, and he just said, "What do you want? I'm just a dressmaker." And he started laughing, and he ate my microphone, which was fairly obscene. And I was quite shocked, honestly, and then laughing because I always laughed when I was nervous. Anyway, so that's a moment.
Well, and your film is called Carton d'invitation.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know what a carton d'invitation is, why don't you tell us why you named the film that? And now I'm asking two questions. The other one is that not only did you shoot a lot of this, and your husband Pierre shot a lot of it with the scenarios with your children that are also in the film, but you have a fan base all over the world. A fan base, Nan base, that it's a Nan base all over the world, and they send you clips that you have used. Okay, so go answer those questions.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's a lot. Okay, but starting with Carton d'invitation, a friend of mine would talk a lot about the Carton d'invitation, and when I started my project, I said, that's the title. It doesn't make sense. It confuses everybody. I don't even care. People have trouble saying it. But for me, it's really important because carton d'invitation is a fancy word for invitation card. And the fashion shows in those days really had fancy invitation cards. And, you would collect them. And I did. And then I threw them all out. But luckily, whenever friends would come to Paris, I'd say, hey, you want to go to a fashion show? And I'd pass my invitations to people. So luckily friends kept them. So for my film, I was able to do a bit of a montage of some carton d'invitation. Like I was that lame. Luckily friends had kept them. But I just zoomed in on this idea that I had to call it carton d'invitation because it's really the spirit of the whole thing. That I was, at the time, I was inviting my friends, but I'm aware that I was going into these, an outsider going into these really insider places, but I was taking a lot of people with me. And I became a school teacher after I did this work. And I feel like, I put invitation, I wanted to embody an invitational approach in my teaching. And I just thought that's what the movie has to be called, because I really wanted to bring everybody in and come back with me into the 80s and 90s and experience it for the first time. So that's why my movie had to be called that. But yes, through the films is all archival pretty much. And it's some VHS tapes I had, and it's a film that a video that my husband filmed of our family, but also a few times he came to work, thank God, with me. Like it was his birthday, said, oh, come on, we'll get a babysitter. And he brought the family handy cam and he shot some really wild stuff at some fashion shows and shot John and I working and so on. And so that's really great for me to have in the film. And, but there were stories that I didn't have. And I spent 2 years making the movie, and I knew there were things I wanted to say or things I wanted to show or things I wanted to explore. And I was kind of stuck maybe having to feature stuff I wasn't as interested in. And through the Instagram, people started to get in touch with me. And so a community helped me make the film because they led me to sources on the internet, bootleg sources on the internet of my work. And they knew my work. They were like, we knew there was a you. It's like I get these crazy messages. But there are even people who, for instance, there's a wonderful professor at Parsons who's also a photographer who also has a magazine, Chris Vidal-Tanoma, who when he was growing up in Barcelona at the age of 14 until the age of 18, he recorded fashion television every week religiously. And it was his education, as it was for so many people who get in touch with me. And their loyalty is visceral. And Chris, gave me some really important gems that are in my movie. Yeah, so people just gave it to me. It's great.
And Nan, okay, so what was the span? So you finished at fashion television, or you finished the work, and then when did you decide to become a school teacher? And then when did you decide was it through research that encouraged you to do the documentary? What sort of led what to
it's pretty crazy. I never ever thought I would look back. I left, not with rancor, but it was like, I have no interest in doing anything more to do with fashion. But it was in 98, I went back to school and became a school teacher. That was great. We'd moved back to Canada. I was able to understand the curriculum for my children, got my kids all through school. And it was a good schedule for a mom. And I was 64 and invited to participate in a Zoom show in Chicago at the Alliance Française with Aimé Leberge. And I said no, like for 6 months. It's like, I have nothing to say. There's no way. I couldn't even dream of what I would have to say. And she pushed and pushed. And I said, okay, if I can bring John Cressy with me. And the day before, we had a little meeting, and it was within a 15-second period that I realized, oh, my goodness, I think I do have some things that I could tell people about. And maybe it is interesting. And gosh, I've got that archive at home in the basement that I could start playing with. And I really decided on a dime, like 15 seconds, oh, I'm going to retire. I'm going to do a master's in documentary media. I'm going to make this documentary. It was in a flash. I never really understood. I didn't understand that it was interesting. And what I discovered is that nowadays, the 90s is really in. People find it fascinating. For a long time, it's like, oh, that's just the life I lived. But people do find it very inspiring and interesting. And it was worth discovering that I had things to say. And then doing a master's and doing all that research and thinking, I discovered I have a lot to say about that time and fashion television. I'm still learning and learning. But it was it was a very much a gateway time. It was a liberatory time. Things were there was a lot of celebration. There was a lot of new kinds of freedom, and just in terms of classism, the way that we brought people into these spaces that had been very much closed before, and that everybody in their living room could see these things and witness how people were behaving, and young people could say, I want to have a career in fashion, and memorize the names. And that's what they did, just memorize the names of all of the players. There's a stylist. Oh, what does a stylist do? These people who are watching, because I'm interviewing them a lot these days, and they were it was like university for them.
Hmm.
It was pretty, so it was very much a gateway for people. And it also, there was a lot going on at that time. And so fashion television showed without telling, but offered people queer representation at a time when that was really not on television.
Well, I was just going to ask you about that.
It. And that's part of the loyalty thing, is people were like, you gave me a sense of myself, of my identity. I could watch it with my mother and look at her, and we'd both cry, and she'd get it, and I felt accepted. It's deep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's I mean, exactly. The program opened all kinds of doors that one wouldn't even imagine were opened, and the one that you just mentioned, I think, is a very important one. It's funny because I have to talk about myself as always, Nan and Amy, but I can remember a cameraman saying to me one time, always pretend that you're supposed to be there. Just go in, just walk in and start doing your job. And chances are they're going to think you're supposed to be there, which means that you're going to be, and I'll share this short story but I remember getting all the way into the forecourt at Buckingham Palace one time with a camera crew when we were filming, and we were probably there for 15 minutes prior to being picked up by the security people and kicked out of the, they have those big gates at the front of Buckingham Palace where everybody stands, and anyway, that was a good story. But
it is a good story.
It was, I mean, the media, the tools that were being used in the media were becoming smaller and smaller. You could be a fly on the wall watching Cindy Crawford or whoever getting made up, and so everything became so much more accessible. And I think a lot of it became accessible because
some of the cameras, sorry, I'm interrupting your question, but I found some old pictures recently, and John, those early cameras that John was using, the old beta cams, they were still pretty heavy, but they were lighter than they had been. Yeah. Anyway.
No, but because of that,
yeah.
I mean, would you go so far as to say, things like reality TV and those sorts of shows came from what you were doing?
I don't think I'd go that far, but we certainly happened before.
You're too polite.
Yeah.
I think so. And Nan, who's your biggest influence?
My influence? Oh my goodness, you've caught me by surprise. Let me think. In fashion? In
any which way, who influences you?
Gosh. Oh my gosh, you're gonna have to. I'm just trying to think of somebody. Oh, okay. I'm trying to think. Should this be somebody who's influenced me my whole life, or just somebody who I'm thinking about right now who's influencing me? How about we go with that? There's somebody named Deirdre Baer who wrote biographies of both Simone de Beauvoir and Samuel Beckett, and I'm finding her life, for me currently right now, extremely inspiring, because she went at it. She interviewed a lot of people to do those books, and one of them took her 10 years and the other took her 8 years, and she didn't give up. And she faced in the 70s and 80s in academic life, she faced a lot of sexism. So she's a bit of a hero for me currently. I'm finding her very inspiring. Yeah.
Let me ask you, Claude Montana has recently left this planet.
Mm-hmm.
So many other names, Yves Saint Laurent, for example, many years ago. And these people became household names through their fashion. What is it, Bill Blass, all these kinds of people.
Yeah.
Is there I mean, is there a new generation of this? Are there new names that are coming
Yeah.
out, or were these times unique that you were documenting?
You know, I don't want to sound too full of it or full of myself or naive. But people say that was a golden age. And people just this week have been messaging me who they're heading off to the Pret-a-Porter shows in Paris, and they're going, oh, you know, I probably received 6 or 7 messages in the last few days. Oh, you know, it's just not the same. Oh, this was a good show, but you know, and there are people doing beautiful things and wonderful things, and I try to tune in. You know, doing this project, I had to kind of get caught up and see, and I see wonderful things that people do. But that very much was an age of very strong personalities, and it was just basic thing is that the name of the person was the name of the house, you
Yeah.
know, and it was a different time. And I left in 98 and just kind of completely forgot about everything and tuned out. But going back and doing doing the research for this project, I realized that just after me in that 2-year period, so many of the people that I had who are in the movie were out of business, or their companies, the companies are still going and selling perfume, but they were pushed out. So there was a real turning point in the
Oh,
late
I mean,
90s.
it's
Yeah.
dog eat dog.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, another thing is just, you know, just on the subject of everybody's gone. I screened my movie in Dublin a couple of weeks ago, and this wonderful designer, Peter O'Brien, who was at Rochas for a long time, and before that, Chloe and all kinds of places, but he was the Rochas guy. And he brought his friends, and he teaches fashion, and he brought Irish journalists and everybody, his students, and his family. And his brother just was like bugging him on the way in the door. Are you going to be the only person in this movie who isn't dead? It was almost true. And now Claude makes it. Oh, anyway.
You know, Nan, I was just thinking about this. It's so satisfying being in film. It's very satisfying because it's very arduous to create something like this. Hence the reason why it took 2 years, especially documentary filmmaking. You know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of footage. You've got to take it down. Yeah, it's nuts. And so you're right now, you're at the screening stage, and I imagine, you know, distribution or film festivals or Netflix, which I think Netflix, if you're listening, this should go on this, and which you could very easily, by the way. And but I'm just wondering, where are you? And plus the fact it's very satisfying to watch your film and do Q&A because you created something. Where are you on your journey for this film, and what do you hope for?
Well, in a week or so, March 11th, I'm going to be showing it at Central St. Martin's, and I'm very pleased about that. And
In London.
In London, and you know, that's where John Galliano and Alexander McQueen and absolutely Peter O'Brien, everybody went there. And I have to admit that I feel deeply satisfied about that turn of events. And I'm invited to go to Parsons in New York
Wow.
in the fall, and that's great. But I can just rest now. I had the incredible, I showed it in Berlin. That was every audience is so different too. They were crying in Berlin. I was invited to Chicago by the Art School of Fashion Art Institute of Chicago and the Alliance Française. And so that was very exciting. And I've shown it in Toronto and in Paris in 2 places, and now Dublin and now Central St. Martin. So that's been very exciting. And as it's a bootleg film, it's an art film, I can show it, I can screen it when I'm there. Old Lady Math those are my conversations. So I made a film out of my conversations, but I don't have the rights. And I can't I can't
Right.
put it in the festival. And, you know, maybe, who knows, maybe I'll decide to cross that road, but I don't think I will. In terms of where it's going now, while I was doing the research, I couldn't just, you know, thinking about an archive for 2 years, could be very suffocating to think about the past. So I absolutely had to break out of that, and I wanted to research and get in touch with people. And so I started recording podcasts. So I found a lot of people I used to know and just interesting, creative people in that world. And I recorded quite a few podcasts, which I have not edited yet. So I've got quite a bit of material to still edit. Right now, I'm finishing up and will release next week a podcast that I recorded with Connie Fleming, who was the first openly trans model on the Manfred Mugler's runway in 1989.
Wow.
And her story is incredible. And so I'm releasing. So I've got a lot of these conversations with people, and we'll see what happens. But I'm working on a book that will be about my story, but also the story of these incredible people that I've.
Wow. Do you have a working title, Nan, for that? Do you have a working title?
No.
Maybe yours and Kevin's book will come out at the same time.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope so. But I've been interviewing. I've been interviewing a lot of people. Yeah, you better do it, Kevin.
On that note,
just before Amy asks you our signature final question, I have to ask you this. I'm going to make a statement, though. Isn't it funny, Nan, how you're talking about these things, and you weren't only making a fashion show, you were making a social show. There's all sorts of social sort of recognition in terms of the kinds of people that are involved. You're giving credence to people who are working through their own sexuality, all these kinds of things, which I think it's fantastic. And it is sort of a historical sort of social comment on what life was like in the late 80s and 1990s, the things that we're going through. Now, before we go, I have to ask you this, because I'm a guy. Who is the most beautiful person you ever saw? And who is the biggest asshole?
I'm not going to tell you who's the biggest asshole.
Come on.
Oh, come on.
No. Let's say Karen Mulder and Heather Stewart White, in terms of models, where, everybody has their own taste, but and so lovely. And you just look at them, they're just perfect. They're incredible. It's incredible. Yeah, but we can, the world's full of assholes.
We'll leave the asshole guy to another day.
Well, actually, speaking of assholes, if you think about it, so the next question is, based on, the wonderful people that you've met, and you're in the fashion industry, so there are a lot of challenges and egos and all of that, and people that are not necessarily, the nicest people. Why do you believe in people, Nan?
Well, for lots of reasons, and maybe even I'll start with there's a journalist called Marion Hume, and I just read yesterday, she was talking about something. She said, dismiss fashion at your peril. Fashion actually can tell people a lot of things. And I believe in people because humanity is so varied and beautiful. And if people, my experience in Paris, or I'm probably not getting this all right, but my experience in Paris was as a human being, and I went into every room and just treated people like human beings, and they acted accordingly, and there's people think that everybody's, they're fancy and they're high and mighty, but if you just look at somebody in the eyes, you can usually connect to them, and they'll be human, and it's very encouraging. And, yeah, so I don't know if I've answered you very well, but.
You did. Thank you, Nan.
Nan Devitt Tremblay, the film is called Carton d'Invitation. The show was called Fashion Television. Everything out of Paris was Nan behind the scenes.
Not everything, not everything, but a lot of it.
And thank you so much for spending some time with us today on Believe in People. Thank you, Nan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nan.
Okay, the word that I was desperately searching for there was validation, in that the work that Nan was doing was broadcast all over the world. We're talking everywhere, Asia, everywhere in the world. And, for people who were challenged with their own sexuality at those times, and Nan has told me, people from all kinds of backgrounds, farming backgrounds, people from India, people, were allowed to validate themselves because there was a show that helped validate them. And she was on the front lines of that. And I think it's wonderful work.
And I think too, Kev, the fact that she trailblazed something that was, and I actually do think that it was one of the first fashion reality TV shows that inspired other reality shows. But
sure.
I think the message too is that don't be afraid of setting off on a trail that hasn't been blazed. Like, I mean, really, it is going behind the scenes with confidence. Having the confidence to forge ahead. And I think and what you don't know actually kind of sometimes helps you and builds your confidence a little. So I'm grateful for Nan coming on, and thanks, Kev, for introducing us to Nan. And if you've enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to subscribe to Believe in People. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye now.